Alright people, look at the title. This video is about remote call setups, not about your desk or your monitor stand. We're talking about how to sound and look good in a video call, like for instance in a Zoom call or Google Meet or what have you. Cool? Alright then, well, let's roll the intro. Hey, Vlad here from devinside.com. Welcome to another video. If you're new here, you should probably know that this is mostly a programming channel, so most of my videos are programming tutorials. I've never reviewed gear before and I'm not gonna start now, even though there will be a couple of recommendations towards the end of the video. Here's what's up. Most programmers know a lot about hardware, desk setups, and there are blogs about how to set your freaking arm bars on your fancy chairs, and all of this stuff is important. However, more and more programmers and other professionals start to work remotely, and let's be honest, we don't know jack shit about microphones or cameras. If you search for videos about this, you find a bunch of content creators making videos for other content creators, and the problem with this is obviously that you're not a content creator, you're just a professional who tries to look good on a Zoom call. And so they review microphones and cameras and lights and all of these fancy things, and they give recommendations. However, those recommendations are not good for you because you're not the target audience. You're not a content creator, you're not an upcoming photographer or a cinematographer. You just want to look good in a phone call, that's it. I happen to be in the perfect position to make this video because I work remotely full-time as an engineer, and on the side I make these videos for you. These days I even work with a professional video editor and audio engineer who reviewed the script for this video and corrected all of my mistakes. Which brings me to the message from our sponsors, which is you or people like you. We're currently on the road to 500 patrons who collectively help me pay for that editor. Instead of spending time on editing videos, I prefer to invest this time in answering your questions on Discord or hang out with you during live streams. One last thing before we begin. My editor is about to release an awesome free movie about the world of insects. It's called Aninagin, and you might want to check it out. The links are going to be down in the description. Alright, let's begin. I have two goals for this video. The first one is to teach you how to sound and look good on camera, and the second one is to make this video short. Believe it or not, the second goal is way harder than it sounds. In fact, when I was writing the script for this video, it got so long that I realized that I'm going to split it into two. This one is going to be dedicated to audio, and the next one is going to be all about the video. Here's the plan. I'm going to cut out as much information as possible, and if you want the details, then check out the links in the description below for the people who know every little corner of this stuff. Also, make sure to check out the timestamps if you want to skip some sections. Alright, so this video is essentially a brief introduction into the world of cinematography. However, before we get into that, let's talk about some computer basics, which should be obvious to any programmer, but less obvious to someone like an architect or a lawyer who is all of a sudden faced with the world of remote work. If you're a programmer, please skip this section. Not really. We're talking about video calls, so you need a modern computer or a laptop. Most laptops or computers these days are powerful enough to encode, send, receive, and decode a video phone call, even with multiple participants. So the problem is not whether your computer is powerful enough, since most of them are, even laptops, it's the cooling. It's mostly a laptop problem these days, and Mac laptops seem to handle it better. The essence of the problem is that there is no space in a laptop to put huge fans in there, and even if you did, it would get so loud that your microphone would pick it up. So if you have a laptop, you might consider putting it on a stand to create a bit more space so that your laptop can breathe, and also clean your fans at least once a year. Just bring it to a repair shop. It should take them about a couple of hours. I want to make this video as short as possible, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about computer parts, but these days you pretty much need an SSD, 16 gigs of RAM, and probably a dedicated GPU. If you're on a Mac that was produced in the last couple of years, then you shouldn't worry about any of that. I'm recording this video in 2022, by the way. Number two, the battery. If you're on a battery, your laptop might attempt to switch into a battery-saving power plan and thus reduce the quality of your video call. It's configurable, and if you don't know how to configure it, well, you might want to plug it in, because I'm not going to show you how to do it because I'm trying to make this video short. Just Google for something like power plan and you'll be good to go. Moving on to number three, which is the network. Only two things. Cables are better than Wi-Fi. It's about stability, not about the speed. And two, you might want to check your internet plan, or at least run a speed test on a website like speedtest.net, for example. You're looking not only for the download speed, but also for the upload speed and for the ping to the server. For the ping, the less the better. The good values are under 10, but anything below 50 is good enough. And in fact, unless you're over 70, I wouldn't worry about changing the internet provider. For the bandwidth, you're looking at 10 Mbit down and 10 Mbit up. If you're living alone, you might get away with half of it. Some people don't realize this, but having a video call implies sending a lot of data over the internet, so both your internet plan and your bandwidth need to be able to handle it. Number 4, you need a microphone and a camera. Well, duh. If you're on a laptop, you should have both. All right, let's finally move on to the reason why we're here. The first thing you need to know is that if you know nothing about the world of cinematography, then listen to your intuition very carefully and then do the exact opposite. Your intuition is 100% wrong. And no, I'm not trying to be arrogant. But Vlad, how can you say this? You don't know me. Well, how about a quiz? What is the first thing that comes to mind if I ask you the question of today's video? How to look and sound good on camera? And if the first thing that comes to your mind is, well, get a better microphone and a camera, well, I have good news for you. You're watching the right video. Here's the meat of the video. These are the only things that you need to care about in order. The first one is going to sound a little bit weird, but bear with me. The first one, you, and no, I'm not talking about eating your vegetables, your beauty sleep, or your makeup. Number 2, clear audio, and number 3, video. So only these 3 things, you, audio, video. Spoiler alert, the microphone is the last item in the audio section and the camera is the last item in the video section. Shocker. I know. The rest of the video are details, so if it's too long, I see you in the next one. No hard feelings, we're still friends, I promise. I did this guy. First things first, as a content creator, my content is way more important than my production quality. If what I say doesn't make sense, then who cares about how I sound like? Now, I know that you're not a content creator, but hear me out. Let's say that you're applying for a remote job and you actually don't know how to do the job. Do you really think that a fancy cinematography setup is going to get you the job? Sure, it's going to make a good impression, but is it really going to get you the job? And if it does, eventually you're going to get fired anyway. The same goes for when you're already hired. Sure, your colleagues are going to appreciate the effort, but if you can't do the job, then what good is it? All right, let's not dwell on this point and get to the good stuff. In fact, there's this one thing that you actually could improve, apart from, rhetoric and how to present stuff, etc., etc. It's how to project your voice. Google that. Moving on. Audio is way more important than video. In fact, we're gonna make me look like crap for a bit in post so that you see the difference and you're not clicking away. In fact, we're gonna turn the video off entirely and I'm gonna keep talking and you're not clicking away because the information that I have is way more important than how I look. The sound, the audio is way more important than video. So let's talk about audio and we'll cover video in the next one. I could spend hours talking about audio, but remember, we're trying to make this video short and yes, I know it's already long enough. So here's a list of your priorities. Number 1, ambience or your room. Number 2, an audio interface. And I know that you don't know what this is. I'll explain later. Number 3, audio processing. Again, let me explain. And number 4, lo and behold, the microphone. I told you it would be the last item on the list. Let's talk about each point. The sound waves, they travel through the air and they bounce off reflective surfaces and they go back into your microphone and you don't want that. So you want to avoid reflective surfaces. These are empty walls, high ceilings, glass, and any kind of tiles, whether they're on the walls or on the floor. Do not have your calls in the bathroom, please, no matter how boring they are. Here are the basics. Carpet is your best friend, and the more stuff, the more furniture you have in the room, the better. What you're looking for is things that absorb sound instead of reflecting it. Curtains, closet, couches, even pictures. The more the better. If you wish to research this stuff further, acoustic treatment is the politically correct term. Before we get into the next section, I would like to point out that if you're on a Mac laptop, you might want to skip the rest of the video after the next paragraph and just go straight to the video about video. Here's the thing, even though I'm not an Apple fanboy, I have a lot of colleagues who use Apple Mac laptops, and I have to say that I don't know when they started doing this, but the microphones in them sound borderline phenomenal. I'm very impressed. So yeah, if you're not on the Mac, keep watching. Let's move on to number 2, which is the audio interface. Now, what is an audio interface? Well, it's actually nothing complicated. It's sort of like an external sound card. It's a thing that sits next to your laptop or computer, and it's connected via USB. Here's the thing, the entire computer industry was the whole necessity for the audio and video consumptions and, YouTube and gaming and streaming and all of that stuff is relatively new. I would like to stress the word relatively because it's old enough for what I'm about to say, but let's back up real quick. Before we had this massive media consumption and production on the computer, most audio and video gear came from either music studios or Hollywood movie sets. So they were A, very expensive, and B, analog. Translation, no USB. Most professional microphones have a so-called XLR output, which stands for external line return. In all honesty, you didn't need to know that, but I couldn't resist. So you speak into your microphone, an analog signal goes into your audio interface. The analog audio signal gets converted into a digital one, which goes via USB into your computer. This is called an analog to digital converter, or ADC. Audio interfaces also contain the reverse, the DAC, or the digital to analog converter. Let's say you're watching this YouTube video, the digital sound goes via USB into your audio interface, it gets converted into the analog signal, and it goes out not via XLR, but via a typical headphone jack. And by the way, typical is also a hand wavy thing because in the music studio industry they use a big headphone jack instead of the typical small one, but they're adapters, so you're good. Now, technically, you don't need to know any of that because the influencer economy and the streamer economy is booming these days. So today you have amazing microphones that connect directly via USB, so you don't even need an audio interface. I'll give you some pointers towards the end of the video. The only reason I brought the audio interfaces up is to make the point that if you go with a traditional setup, an audio interface is more important than a microphone. Now, don't get me wrong. If you get a crappy microphone, you'll never get a decent sound out of it. However, a lot of people who don't really understand this stuff, they just have the money because, this is one of the biggest problems here is that a lot of content creators are just like kids who are starting out in their mother's basement. So they don't have any money. And so they listen to other content creators who give them advice and they go and buy a cheap microphone, cheap audio interface. So you're someone who is working. So you're someone who has money. So unfortunately, you cannot just go out there and buy a really expensive microphone and make it sound amazing, because a lot of people unfortunately do exactly this. They go and buy a microphone for like $400, but then they don't invest in the audio interface. They spend like $50 on the audio interface, and then this super fancy microphone doesn't sound any good. So this is the only reason I brought this up, right? So the audio, if you go with the traditional setup, the audio interface is more important than the microphone, which does not mean that it needs to be super expensive. As long as you spend like $100 or $150, you're good. All right, so we didn't get to the gear portion yet, but I can't resist. So if you're not going with a traditional setup, if you're going with these relatively new USB microphones, then you need to be aware that most of the stuff is targeted at live streamers who are usually game streamers, and therefore they're on Windows. So the driver situation is pretty much as always. You have the best support for Windows. Mac is fine as well because a lot of movie production is happening on Macs. And then Linux, well, Linux is Linux. I don't have to say anything about it. In fact, there's one super important thing that might mitigate the issue, but it actually also might create issues with drivers, and we're going to talk about this in the next video. And this fact is that the professional cameras might have an audio interface built in, so you can plug your microphone directly into the camera. But then we're going to talk about how to capture video and audio live, and for this you're going to need the so-called capture cards. We're going to talk about this in the next video. And then again, you're going to need the drivers for this capture card, and then again Windows, then Mac, then Linux. Let's move on to number 3, which is audio processing. I'm going to try to avoid to go into any details, but there's a lot of info to cover here. In fact, even though this point is more important than the microphone itself, I imagine that it's too much for most of you, so you might want to skip this section and go straight to the microphones. First of all, we're not just talking about an equalizer. There's a lot that goes into an audio processing chain. We're talking about compressors, limiters, noise gates, noise suppression, AI noise suppression. We would be here all day. Assuming that you set up your gain correctly, which means that you're not speaking too loud into the microphone, the audio engineers can do wonders in post-processing. For instance, I'm going to ask my audio engineer to make me sound like I'm underwater.
As you can see, I sound totally different, which is
why audio processing is more important than the microphone, because with a relatively decent microphone, it can't be like a $20 microphone, but with a relatively decent microphone, you can sound it really nice with some audio processing. Now here's the problem though. There's no post-processing in a freaking Zoom call. All of it needs to happen live, and here are a couple of facts that you need to know about this. You can do this live in software, but for that I would need another video just to explain how all of it works, right? So your sound would go into the software, then the software would create a virtual audio device. You would use this virtual audio device instead of the microphone for your Zoom calls, and so on and so on. All of this stuff is called VST, which stands for Virtual Sound Technology. If you Google for something like VST plugins, you'll find a lot of voice processors like the infamous voice changer. Another option is to still do it in software with VSTs, but instead of using an external program, you would use a program that comes with your audio interface. Now, not every audio interface comes with one, only the ones that are designed for these streamers and all of that stuff, all of this live stuff. It's much easier for you because everything is streamlined and easier to set up. By the way, I should probably mention that all of this software stuff will take a little bit from your processor, right? So if your laptop overheats, or if your laptop is, relatively old, this stuff can get tricky. The third option is to do this directly in your audio interface. And for this, your audio interface is going to be more expensive because it's going to require a DSP, which is a digital signal processor, right? It's basically a microprocessor for digital signal processing. Therefore, your computer doesn't need to do it. This thing can do it automatically, and you still control it via VSTs. As already mentioned, these ones are more expensive and are also a little bit more rare. And again, drivers are an issue as well. So yeah, you've been warned, my Linux people. Anyway, these ones are awesome. In fact, I don't have one myself, but someday I'll get one because they allow you to hear yourself live after those effects are applied. Now, to be clear, any audio interface is going to allow you to hear yourself live, however, before the effects are applied, because the effects are not applied inside. And if they're applied within your computer, then you will only be able to hear yourself with a delay, which is not what you want. Again, the problem with them is that they cost a lot because there's only few of them, because the target audience for this is very niche. For a very long time, the music industry didn't need any of that. They could do all of this stuff in post-production. You only need all of this live stuff during concerts, and over there they would use like these huge mixers with like millions of knobs, and you can get like a smaller mixer from home as well, but these days there are better alternatives. Cool, let's finally talk about microphones. Remember, it's that thing that you wanted to buy before you start watching this video? The first thing to understand about microphones is that they come in all shapes and sizes. To be more precise, there are several kinds of microphones in terms of the actual technology that picks up the sound. There are different bodies, and there are also different pickup patterns. They're called polar patterns. I'm glad you asked. I know it sounds complicated, but it's really not. The technology within the microphone is arguably the most important one, so let's start there. The most important part about this, and this is very important because this is the mistake that I made in the beginning of my YouTube career, so listen carefully. You cannot determine the tack within your microphone just by looking at it. It is so important that I'm going to say this again. You cannot determine the tack within your microphone just by looking at it. So don't get one just because it looks shiny or because your favorite YouTuber uses it. Thank you, by the way, I knew we had a connection. You only need to care about two types of technology, dynamic and condenser. The official name is the capsule style, by the way. Condenser microphones are the best sounding microphones for voice. They use, well, a condenser to convert the vibrations of the air into an electrical current. The most important thing to know about them is that they need electricity for this. They need a power source. If you search for condenser microphones, the first thing that you're going to see is going to be the 48 volt phantom power thingy. You don't need to worry about the number too much because most audio interfaces are capable to provide exactly 48 volts of phantom power, but double check it anyway just in case. The cool thing about them is that they have a lot of, well, power, and so they're more sensitive. You can put them further away from you if you really wanted to. Some of them even so far that they won't be in the shot. It's very important to understand that you can only put some of them so far away that they won't be in the shot. So please don't get a random condenser microphone and put it far away from your face. This is exactly what I did in the beginning of my YouTube career. The first 50 videos were recorded like this, so feel free to go and check them if you wish. Cool, now you might be thinking condenser microphones are the best sounding for voice, so Vlad is just going to tell me which one to buy, and then we're good, right? Well, not so fast. Nothing is perfect in this life, and there's a huge disadvantage to condenser microphones, which is also their strength. They are the most sensitive too sensitive in fact. See, microphones don't have brains, whereas your brain can filter out some sound that comes through your ears. Microphones generally can't. This is, by the way, also why audio processing is more important, because over there you can do wonders. The point is that if you're someone who doesn't have too much control over your environment, if you have kids running around, cats or dogs, or even if you're just someone who likes to take notes during your meetings, people will hear you type. If you have an awesome microphone, it will be a very pleasant sound, but it's still a sound, so it might not be what you want. Oh, and remember that power source? It implies that there is electrical current floating through the veins of your microphone, even if you're not talking, and it's audible. I believe it's called self-noise or noise floor, and you can find it in the spec sheet for your microphone. Condenser mics are frequently used in music studios, in rooms full of foam, by the way, and also on movie sets. Remember how I said that there are different kinds of condenser microphones? We'll get to that. By the way, if you live close to something like a train passing by, then there's pretty much nothing that can remove it unless we're talking about some AI noise suppression or something. For example, I live on the first floor and there's a small road over here, and every time there is a car or a motorcycle passing by, I actually have to stop because my microphone is a condenser microphone. It's very sensitive. In fact, for the next couple of paragraphs, whenever there will be a car or a motorcycle passing by, I'm actually not going to stop, and maybe you will be able to hear it. By the way, most video software these days have some noise suppression built in. There is a checkbox somewhere, so you might want to tick it. Alright, now let's talk about dynamic mics. Completely different technology, no power source required. They are the opposite of being sensitive. They're known to be able to take a beating. They're usually used during concerts where people can even drop the microphone and it will survive. During podcasts where you want people to hear your voice but not another guest voice coming through your microphone. And they're also used during live streaming because people don't want to hear the keyboard. Dynamic mics work the reverse way of a loudspeaker. In fact, you could even use a loudspeaker to record your voice, but let's not get carried away. And by the way, there's a car passing by. I'm not sure if you can hear it. There is a suspended coil in front of a magnet that you literally have to move by the air that comes out of your mouth. They're perfect for recording tutorials, for example. Check out a couple of my tutorials. You almost never hear my keyboard. Granted, I use a laptop keyboard, but still. By the way, just FYI, if you're using a mechanical keyboard, well, they're very loud. They will be picked up, sometimes even by dynamic microphones. The huge disadvantage of the dynamic mics is that it's virtually impossible to remove them from the shot. They have to be in your face or otherwise they won't hear anything. In the original version of the script, in the section about audio processing, I had a relatively long section in which I would talk about the gain that the audio interface needs to provide to your microphone. Condenser microphones are very sensitive. They don't need too much gain that comes from your audio interface. They get enough power from the 48 volts of phantom power provided by your audio interface. However, the dynamic microphones, on the other hand, they need a lot of gain, which is exactly why I told you that audio interfaces are more important. Cheap audio interfaces can't even provide enough gain for dynamic microphones. By the way, about the condenser microphones, some audio interfaces have amplifiers in them that are so efficient that they can provide the 48 volt phantom power to your microphone without being plugged in into the wall. The USB power is enough. In fact, I'm using one right now because I've been a digital nomad for a very long time and I needed to travel. I needed something small. I needed something that doesn't need external power, so I found this one and I'm very happy with it. Let's talk about shapes now, and they are important. It's not just about cosmetics. We'll only talk about three shapes. The first one are the so-called shotgun microphones. These are the ones that are usually used in movies. These are the ones that you see on movie sets, but you actually don't see in movies because they're never actually in the shot. They're sometimes called boom mics because they're positioned, on a boom arm. In fact, I'm using one right now, which you don't see. And in fact, it's positioned on my desk instead of a boom arm, which is not a good idea because it would pick up the vibrations from the desk, which is totally fine for me because when I'm standing and recording these videos, I'm actually not touching my desks. And if I did, I could also use a shock mount, which would be positioned over here, and it would sort of like suspend the microphone in the air. Usually like some ribbons are used for this. And so the microphone kind of like floats in the air and this absorbs a little bit the vibrations. If you're using a dynamic microphone, a shock mount is usually not necessary. Also, get a heavy desk so that it doesn't shake, no matter which microphone you use, if you attach your microphone to the desk. it's a good idea not to do this at all. As already mentioned, sometimes a shotgun microphone can be attached to the camera. You just need to be careful how it's powered because sometimes it needs batteries and you probably don't want that. The second shape that we will talk about are the Lavalier microphones, or the lav mics. These are the ones that are commonly used in interviews when a shotgun microphone wouldn't work for various reasons. These are those small ones that you hide beneath the collar or attach to the ear, for example. Even though they sound really great, if you know what you're doing, stay away from them because they can be a little bit finicky because some of them are battery powered, some of them are USB powered. They usually don't even come with an XLR jack. They use a typical like headphone jack. They're designed for recordings in the field. Sometimes you can even record directly into the microphone. So they're not really for you. You're not the target audience for them. Again, it's totally possible. You just need to do more research and make sure that you can actually connect them to your audio interface or your camera or whatnot. The third shape is probably the most common one, the most familiar to you as well. It's those really big microphones that you know from live streams or podcasts. Again, very important to know, you cannot determine whether they're dynamic or condenser just by looking at them, so do your own research. Notice how they're always positioned about a fist away from the speaker's mouth, even when they are condenser microphones, because condenser microphones are of this shape are designed to be in front of you, even though theoretically you could position them a little bit further away. In fact, this is what I did in the beginning of my YouTube career, as already mentioned. I bought a Rode NT1 kit, which is a condenser microphone, and a bunch of people use it. But back then I didn't understand that this was a condenser microphone. I really didn't want a microphone to be in the shot like I'm doing right now with a shotgun microphone. And I even went into a music shop and they said, "Do you need a shotgun microphone?" And I was like, "No, but I saw the other people use that one." And so I bought it, and it sounded horrible because I did position it outside of my shot. You can watch the first 50 videos or so and you'll know what I mean. I'm gonna call these microphones in-your-face microphones because they have to be right in front of you, whether it's condenser or dynamic. Now, if you decided to go with a condenser microphone, the ones, you know, in your face, then you might notice that some people use a so-called pop filter right in front of them. Pop filters are used to reduce the so-called plosive sounds. These are the sounds that are produced by the letters P and B, like and b. These sounds send a huge amount of air towards the capsule of your microphone, so if you go with a condenser, you for sure need a pop filter. It also protects your microphone in those times when you scream at it, for example during rap or metal videos, which is not something that you're gonna do, but still. Sometimes your microphone will have a windscreen to protect it from the wind. The most important thing to know about it is that a windscreen is not a pop filter. Windscreens are for wind, pop filters are for plosive sounds. The next thing we'll talk about are the pickup, or the so-called polar patterns. It's the microphone's sensitivity to sound pressure. Basically, the microphones don't record the sound with the same sensitivity depending on which direction it comes from. For speech, you want the microphones that reject the sound that comes from the sides, like this one. Over here, I'm talking, now I'm in front of it, now I'm on the side, and I'm gonna try to speak from the back, but probably not gonna work. Here's a quick rundown of the polar patterns. You're looking for either cardioid or supercardioid. And those are designed for speech. They take more sound from the front and they reject the sounds from the other side. The supercardioid rejects more sounds from the side than from the back, and the cardioid rejects even more from the back, but not that much from the sides. It's a very subtle difference though. Omnidirectional captures all sides equally. You don't want that one. Wide cardioid is the mix between cardioid and omni. It's for orchestras and stuff, so don't worry about it. Basically, as already mentioned, what you want is either cardioid or supercardioid because they're designed for speech. The shotgun microphones, for example, are almost always supercardioid. They're also called directional microphones because you point them in some direction, and they're known to record just that. They're really great at rejecting the sounds from the side. The longer the shotgun microphone, the more sounds they reject from the sides. These are usually used in savannas when you want to record the sound of a lion a football field away from you. By the way, all microphone manufacturers tweak the polar pattern a little bit, so they're not all exactly the same. So if you take two condenser microphones from different manufacturers with exactly the same specs, they will never be exactly with the same specs. They will always sound a little bit different. Also, as already mentioned, you want cardioid or supercardioid, but don't rely on it too much because, as you have heard, it will still pick up sounds from the side. It's just going to be more dull. Now that you understand polar patterns, please don't make the mistake that most beginners do when they buy microphones. Unfortunately, I don't have a microphone laying around, but if your capsule is over here, please speak into it like this. And if the capsule is over here, please speak into it like this, right? Which means if it's over here and you don't want it to be in your face, you can still turn it around like this, right? But do not turn it around towards you if it's over here, right? The last thing to know about this whole stuff is the frequency response curves. Whenever you buy a microphone or headphones, they come with a built-in hard-coded equalizer. Some have more bass, some have more treble. Some of it can be adjusted with equalization, but I would go about it like this. If your voice is naturally high, then get a microphone that boosts a little bit the bass. And on the other way around, if your voice is a bit low, then get a microphone that boosts your highs. For example, my voice is male, so it's relatively low, and so I get a microphone that boosts the highs just a little bit. And also remember the conversation about the wind filters? They dampen the sound just a tiny bit, so technically they add a little bit more bass, but it's almost inaudible. It's very, very subtle. Alright, so to recap, both dynamic microphones or condenser microphones could be used for voice, but dynamic always needs to be in your face. Condenser can sometimes be outside of the shot if it's used in, for example, a shotgun microphone. The supercardioid or cardioid patterns are the ones for voice, so this is exactly what you need, but please remember they're not a panacea. They will still record some sound from the sides, as you can hear right now from right and right now from left. Generally speaking, if you have your environment under control, you can go with a condenser microphone, and at this point, probably the poly pattern doesn't even matter that much. Oh, one super important thing, please don't get anything super expensive. Even if you have a voice of an angel and you record it with the most expensive equipment in the world, at the end of the day, it's going to be compressed to garbage in the name of bandwidth by the tools like Google Meet or Zoom. Your budget for audio should be around a couple of $100, and yes, this is what officially goes as not expensive in the world of audio. Your budget for video is going to be even higher. So what should you get? Well, before we get into recommendations, please make sure to watch the second part about video once it's out. I promise you, I'm not trying to get another click out of you. It's just that video can affect sound. We could spend hours on recommendations alone, but I believe that you should go with a USB microphones because they're very decent these days because the streaming world is booming. And again, please do not make this decision before you watch the second portion of the video. I am serious, it can affect your sound. When it comes to USB audio hardware, you actually don't have that many options. Even though streaming has been around for 10 years at this point, most streamers actually use professional XLR microphones. However, there's this company called Elgato, which I really wish would sponsor this video, but I'm too small for them because they created a bunch of products for streamers, and eventually they were actually acquired by another company called Corsair, who produce hardware for gamers. They produce, mice and keyboards and all of this stuff. Okay, so now they have a big company that backs them up. Okay, so and if you go to their website, again, I freaking wish that this video was sponsored by them, you will find everything that you need there. Okay, so they have a microphone called Wave 3. And it's a condenser microphone. It's not one of those that you can position further away. It actually has a mode for this, but still, I would recommend to have it in front of your face. They have, they have the mic arms, they have a pop filter, they have a shock mount, and all of the good things. Again, it's USB, so you need to make sure that you have drivers. They fully support Windows and Mac, even though most gamers are just on Windows. Linux is probably not gonna work. One really cool about it is that it comes with some really good software that allows you to have those VST plugins. The processing is done on your computer, but still you have the software that kind of comes with your microphone. Another competitor is a very brand new company called Beacon, and they created a thing called the Beacon mic. It's a dynamic microphone, so you'd still need a mic arm, but at least you're not going to need a pop filter or even a shock mount. One really cool thing about this is that it actually does have a digital signal processor inside of it, which means all of the VST, all of this audio processing is actually happening within the microphone. So you don't need more resources in your laptop, and it's not going to overheat so easily and so on. The downside, again, super brand new company. The drivers are only available on Windows for now. All right, so these are pretty much my only two USB microphone recommendations. About XLR, we could be here all day. The industry standard is the Shure SM7B, but it costs around $400 and it's a total overkill for just Zoom calls. About the interface, I would again go with Elgato. They have an audio interface as well, and the reason I'm going with it is that it's super simple, and also it comes with the same software, so you have the VST plugins. They are done in your computer, not in the microphone, because again, the microphone you're bringing, but still. By the way, notice that I'm sort of giving you like the industry standards or the very popular microphones, and at the same time, I'm actually not recommending that you use them because they're a total overkill. I actually am not aware of the cheaper options, but I know that they exist. You can get a really good microphone for like $50. You can get a decent audio interface for like $100, and then you get a mic arm for like, I don't know, $30, and then you're done at like $150 for audio. By the way, the Rode NT1 comes as a a kit, right? Kit means there's a pop filter and a shock mount as well. About the shotgun microphones, again, the industry standard is the Sennheiser MKH416, but it's way more expensive than pretty much all the other shotgun microphones out there. It's around $1,000 if you can even get your hands on it. Just FYI, you're hearing it right now, and I had my reasons. No, really, I was traveling for a very long time, and this microphone has a very narrow angle for what it actually records. So if I'm like further away, I really needed this because I didn't have control over my rooms. I was staying in freaking Airbnbs for almost 3 years. Let me say this again. I only mentioned the industry standards just so that you're aware, but I highly recommend that you just go with a USB option or with the option that I'm going to present in the next video. About the audio interfaces, again, we could be here all day, but I really need you to understand something. You're not looking for an awesome sound quality. You're not recording in a music studio, for example, right? Because everything will be compressed to garbage again in the name of bandwidth. So it's much more important to have something like VST plugins for your use case. And the only contender for now is pretty much the Elgato interface. All right, so we're finally done with the audio portion. I'm sorry that it got so long. I really tried to make it shorter. I have rewritten the script several times, but still, there is a lot of ground to cover. I know it sounds all complicated, but it's actually not that complicated. Just get a USB microphone or go with the solution that I'm going to present in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I see you in the next one. For now, as always, it's been Vlad from devinside.com. Don't forget to like this video if you did, subscribe if you want to improve the developer inside you, and if you learned something today, consider supporting me on GitHub sponsors or Patreon, whichever you prefer, and also watch my videos weeks and sometimes even months before everyone else. And most importantly, take care.